Carter Vossler's voice carried through the glass hallway before I even saw him. Innovation comes from fresh perspectives, he declared, loud enough for the entire executive wing to hear. I didn't slow down. I didn't react. I'd heard that speech before, 3 years ago, at my wedding. He raised a glass not to me, but to his son for choosing well. Then he nodded in my direction and added, and to Lila, for keeping things efficient. Efficient. That was the word he used for me. 3 years later, nothing had changed. 14-hour days, weekend logins, late-night vendor calls while everyone else slept. I held together a company that wasn't even mine, at least not in the way it mattered. To them. I wasn't a strategist. I was just Lila Hayes, the daughter-in-law who happened to work here. In Carter's company, Kensington Logistics Group, that meant one thing: you work twice as hard to be seen half as much. I built their supplier pipeline from scratch, negotiated exclusivity, deals with partners who hadn't returned Carter's calls in years, transformed 5 failing departments into a system that increased profits by 22% year over year. No applause, no acknowledgement, not even my name spelled correctly in internal emails. Once, a senior executive asked if I could grab coffee on my way back. I was running his entire division, and still, I stayed, because somewhere, deep down, I believed something naive, that competence would eventually matter more than connections, that results would speak louder than last names. But here's the truth no one tells you in companies like this. Results don't speak. They get reassigned. And I was about to learn that the hard way. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, but only if you believe this know your worth, and don't stay where it's ignored. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And what's the temperature there? This is a fictional story, with some elements enhanced using AI to make it more vivid and engaging. Now, grab yourself a warm cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's continue. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from being the person everything depends on, but no one notices. Not until something breaks. And in my case, nothing ever broke, because I didn't let it. I was the one vendors called when contracts stalled, the one who fixed shipment delays before clients even realized there was a problem, the one who stayed up rewriting strategies so the board could present them like they were sudden strokes of genius. Kensington didn't run because of systems. It ran because I kept it running. I restructured supplier agreements that had been dead for years, secured exclusive partnerships with firms that had blacklisted us, built a logistics framework that reduced operational waste, and quietly boosted our margins quarter after quarter. The numbers spoke clearly: 22% growth year over year. But no one ever said my name in the room where those numbers mattered. The only time I saw it in writing was buried in a compliance memo. After I shut down a senior executive's attempt to expense a luxury weekend as client development. Apparently. That made me memorable. There was a moment, though, one I almost let myself believe in. A major client, one I'd spent 7 months onboarding, sent a gift basket to headquarters. Inside was a handwritten note thanking me directly for precision, professionalism, and relentless follow-through. It was addressed to me. Carter kept the basket. He sent me a blurry photo of the card with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. No acknowledgement, no meeting, no mention. I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because I expected gratitude, but because, for a split second, I thought maybe this time it would be different. It wasn't. And that was the moment something in me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to start paying attention. What most people don't understand is that being overlooked doesn't just make you tired, it makes you careful. That was the phase I entered next. I stopped expecting recognition, stopped waiting for someone to finally notice. Instead, I started documenting everything, quietly, methodically. Emails, contract drafts, vendor clauses, renewal timelines, access logs, anything tied to systems I built or decisions I influenced. I kept a record of it, not out of paranoia, out of pattern recognition. I had seen too many people get erased the moment their work became valuable, rewritten out of narratives, replaced in meetings they once led, credited in footnotes, if at all. So I built my own safety net. It started with something small, a clause buried in a supplier agreement I personally negotiated during the last fiscal year. At the time, even the legal team questioned it. Why specify a single liaison for vendor coordination, the attorney asked. Scanning the draft, I gave her a simple answer. Consistency improves efficiency. What I didn't say was this consistency also leaves a trail. The clause named me Lila Hayes as the authorized point of contact for that vendor relationship through the end of Q4. Any transition would require formal notice and written approval. Unusual, yes, but not impossible, and not challenged. From there, I became more intentional. I organized files in ways only I fully understood, created layered documentation systems, flagged key communications, archived sensitive exchanges off the main channels. Not hidden, just structured. If anyone ever needed to retrace how things worked, they'd have to follow my logic to get there. At the time, it felt excessive, maybe even unnecessary, but something in me had already accepted a truth I hadn't said out loud. Yet I wasn't being built up here. I was being positioned, and positions like mine don't last forever unless you make sure they can't be quietly replaced. The shift didn't happen overnight. It never does. It starts with small changes, the kind most people would ignore. In this case, it started with a lunch. Carter had been unusually upbeat that week, walking around the office like he had already won something no one else knew about. Whistling, smiling, stopping by desks he normally wouldn't glance at. It felt staged, like he was setting a tone before an announcement. That night, over dinner, my husband mentioned it casually. Dad had lunch with an old friend, Mark Ellison, from his golf club. Apparently his son just graduated. Business degree. Might be joining us for a bit. For a bit, I nodded, cutting into my food like it required more focus than it did. An intern, yeah, he said. Just temporary. Dad thinks he's sharp. Of course he did. A week later, he arrived. Ethan Ellison, early 20s. Perfect handshake, bright smile. The kind of confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong somewhere. Carter gave him a personal tour of the entire office. I had been there 3 years and still didn't have a reserved parking spot. Ethan's desk was placed 2 rows from mine. Dual monitors, window view, brand new setup. Meanwhile, I was still using the laptop I bought myself during my first year. On his second day, he leaned over slightly. Hey, do you know how to access the shared project drive? I looked at him for a moment, then smiled politely. I'll ask IT to onboard you. He nodded. Grateful. And you might want to review the supplier agreements, I added. Especially the North Axis contract. It's more complex than it looks. He blinked, clearly not recognizing the name. That didn't surprise me. What I didn't say was this: everything you're about to touch, I built it. And the parts that matter most, you won't even know where to begin. 2 weeks after Ethan's perfectly timed arrival, the atmosphere began to shift. At first, it was just whispers, conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, a few emails accidentally copied too wide, a subject line from finance that read expansion modeling draft before it was quickly recalled. Nothing concrete, but enough to signal something was moving behind the scenes. Then came the details. A new initiative, big enough to redefine the company's direction. Something about scaling logistics for high-volume clients using a centralized system, a system that sounded very familiar, because I had already built the foundation for it. For months, I'd been developing a framework in between everything else I handled. Late nights, early mornings, squeezing strategy into the margins of an already overloaded schedule. My team had even tested a prototype that cut delivery lead times by nearly 20%. We were ready. More than ready. We were the only department operating under budget while still improving output. And suddenly, the company was discovering the same idea. That night, my husband mentioned it again, more excited this time. Dad's talking about that expansion project. He said, he's impressed. Said you basically built the groundwork already. Sounds like he's going to give it to you. I didn't answer right away. I had heard versions of that promise before. Different wording, same ending. Still, a small part of me hesitated. What if this time was different the next morning? I came in earlier than usual, cleaned up reports, refined projections, sent Carter a concise breakdown of what the rollout could look like if executed properly. Clean, efficient, undeniable. His reply came back minutes later. Thumbs up. That was it. Later that afternoon, I saw him across the street at a cafe, sitting with Mark Ellison and Ethan. They were laughing, leaning in, talking through something animated, like a plan already taking shape. Ethan nodded along, confident, engaged like he already belonged in a conversation he had just entered. I stood there for a moment, watching from a distance, not surprised, just confirming something I had already begun to suspect. Whatever this project was going to become, it was no longer about who built it. It was about who would be seen leading it. The announcement came wrapped in catering. That was how I knew it wouldn't be good. Carter only ordered food for 2 reasons: celebration or damage control. And judging by the neatly arranged trays of pastries and fruit skewers lining the conference table, this felt like the second. Everyone gathered slowly. Department heads, project leads, even a few interns who had no real reason to be there except to witness whatever version of vision was about to be presented. I took my usual seat far enough to stay unnoticed, close enough to observe everything. Then Carter walked in, late, as always, confident, rehearsed, and right behind him, Ethan, blazer too stiff, smile too eager, carrying a laptop like it was a prop. Carter didn't acknowledge me once as he began. As you all know, he said, pacing slightly, we're entering a new phase of growth, one that requires innovation, agility, and fresh perspective. There it was again, fresh perspective. He clicked to the first slide. Project Ascend, different name, same blueprint, my blueprint. We've been analyzing trends, identifying opportunities. He continued, describing frameworks I had already implemented months ago. And we believe this initiative will position Kensington as a leader in next-generation logistics. I didn't move, didn't react. I just listened. Then came the moment. I'm pleased to announce that Ethan Ellison will be leading Project Ascend as our interim strategic innovation lead. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that pulls the air out of a room. Ethan stood up awkwardly, clearing his throat. Thank you. I'm really excited to learn. Lead this project. I smiled, and I clapped. 3 quiet, controlled claps. Polite enough to blend in. Detached enough to say everything I wasn't going to say out loud. Around me. Others followed, some hesitant, some confused, a few avoiding eye contact altogether. Carter didn't look at me, not once. No mention of the work, no acknowledgement of the foundation, no courtesy recognition, just a clean reassignment of everything I had built. When the meeting ended, I didn't confront him, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I went back to my desk, opened a new notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of the first page, adjust strategy. Because at that point, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about deciding what came next. If you truly believe my father-in-law was right to replace me with someone younger, just because he's fresh talent, then go ahead and comment agree. But if you feel like that decision was unfair, unreasonable, then write disagree. I just want to know, I'm not the only one who sees it this way. Carter's office smelled exactly the way you'd expect polished wood, expensive cologne, and decisions made without consequences. I didn't knock twice. Once was enough. He was on a call when I stepped in, flipping through a stack of papers like they mattered. Yeah. We'll circle back, he said into the phone. Ethan will take point on vendor coordination. Fresh perspective. Exactly what we need. Of course. He hung up and looked at me with that practiced warmth. Lila, big day. Huh. Exciting times. I smiled. I just wanted to say thank you. He blinked, caught off guard. Oh, for the clarity, I said calmly, for showing me exactly where I stand. I placed the envelope on his desk. Clean, simple. No hesitation. He opened it, scanning the single page. His expression shifted almost immediately. You're resigning? He asked. Like the word didn't quite make sense in his world. 2 weeks' notice. I replied. I'll make the transition smooth. He leaned back, frowning. This is about the project. Isn't it, Lila? Don't take this personally. We're thinking long-term here. I tilted my head slightly. So am I. There was a pause. You're overreacting, he added, tone tightening. We still need you to support Ethan. Help him get up to speed. Support him. I almost laughed. You made your decision, I said evenly. I'm making mine. He stared at me like I'd broken an unspoken rule. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. I'll transfer access to the necessary files. I added, some things may take time, legal clearance and all. His eyes narrowed. Legal? I smiled. Just enough. Some of the contracts are specific. I walked out before he could ask more. Back at my desk. I didn't rush. I packed slowly, methodically, archived files, organized handovers, labeled everything with precision, except for a few gaps, not mistakes, just absences. By the end of the day, the office was already buzzing. By evening, questions had started, and by the next morning, the first system lockout appeared. They were just beginning to realize something simple. I hadn't just been part of the operation. I had been holding it together. It didn't collapse all at once. There was no dramatic explosion, no single moment where everything fell apart, just a slow, unmistakable unraveling. It started with a message. A former colleague forwarded me a screenshot from the company Slack. Does anyone have the North Axis contact procurement is stuck? I stared at it for a second longer than necessary. North Axis wasn't just another vendor. It was the vendor. The one I had negotiated personally, structured carefully, and protected with layers most people never noticed, including a clause, buried deep enough to be ignored until it mattered. I was listed as the sole authorized liaison. Any transition required formal notice and written approval, neither of which had happened. So when Ethan or anyone else tried to reach out, the response was immediate and polite. Unauthorized, no shipments processed, no updates given, just a quiet refusal, wrapped in contract language. That was the first crack. The second came faster. Another supplier flagged a compliance issue, a delivery clause that only remained flexible under my supervision. Without it, penalties reactivated automatically, costs spiked overnight, timelines slipped. Suddenly, Project Ascend, their shiny new initiative, was bleeding before it even launched. I heard about the calls next. Ethan scrambling, reaching out to anyone he could find. Messages sent with PLS advise in the subject line. Meetings scheduled with no clear agenda. Confidence fading just enough for people to notice. Then came the moment that spread through the company like wildfire. A vendor call, simple check-in, routine discussion, until someone asked about intellectual property rights tied to Phase 2. Ethan hesitated, then said, I think it's in the system somewhere. We can sort it out later. Silence. The kind that changes everything, because in that moment, it became clear. He didn't understand what he was leading. And worse, he didn't realize how much of it was never theirs to begin with. That's when the illusion finally broke. Not loudly, but completely. Freedom didn't feel the way I expected. There was no dramatic sense of victory, no rush of adrenaline, just quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice after years of constant pressure finally disappear. I rented a small workspace across town, nothing extravagant. Clean desk, natural light, the faint smell of coffee and printer ink. For the first time in a long time. I wasn't reacting to problems. I was choosing what to build next, within days. The emails started coming in, not from recruiters, from clients, people I had worked with directly, people who remembered who actually answered their calls, who fixed their issues before they escalated, who delivered results without needing recognition. One message stood out. A former client, Hexacore Industries, one of Kensington's largest accounts. Multi-year contract, high stakes, high expectations. They weren't checking in, they were leaving. We'd prefer to work with you directly. Simple, clear, final. I read that line twice. Then I smiled, because that wasn't just a client moving. That was leverage shifting. Word spread faster than I anticipated. Quiet conversations turned into formal inquiries. A lunch meeting here, a hypothetical partnership there, within weeks. I had more opportunities than I had time. I registered my firm officially, Lila Hayes Consulting. No board approvals, no hierarchy, no one deciding whether I was ready. Just results. Meanwhile, updates from inside Kensington kept reaching me. Missed deadlines, budget overruns, internal blame games, Carter pointing at suppliers, legal pointing at operations pointing at strategy, and at the center of it all, Ethan, trying to hold together something he didn't build, couldn't navigate, and no longer controlled. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th call, I answered, because I already knew who it was. And this time, the conversation was going to be very different. Carter didn't bother with small talk. "Lila," he said, voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. "We need to fix this. Not can you help. Not how have you been. Just, we need." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just long enough to matter. "I'm listening," I said. "There have been complications," he continued, choosing each word carefully, like stepping across a cracked surface. Vendors are pushing back. Timelines are slipping. Clients are asking questions. Clients are leaving. I corrected silently. "We think it would be best if you came back, temporarily, just to stabilize things." There it was. The offer that wasn't really an offer. I glanced at the open document on my screen, a draft contract I had already prepared. "I don't return," I said calmly. "I consult." A pause. "Fine," he replied quickly. "Then consult. We'll work out the details." I almost smiled, because for the first time, he wasn't setting the terms. I was. "I'll send a proposal," I said. "Clear scope? Clear rates? Minimum engagement period?" "Of course," he answered. Too fast. I ended the call and finished the document. Triple my previous salary, monthly retainer, vendor authority protections, 90-day minimum, no ambiguity, no room for negotiation disguised as discussion. I sent it. 5 minutes later. The read receipt came through. The reply arrived the next morning. "Consider us retained. No signature flourish. No ego. Just compliance." I printed the email and placed it on my desk, not as a trophy, as a reminder. A few days later, I received another update from inside Kensington. An emergency board meeting, legal present, documents reviewed. And finally, the truth surfaced. The systems, the vendor structures, the operational framework behind Project Ascend. They weren't owned the way Carter assumed. They were tied to me, authored, negotiated, protected, legally. By the time they understood the full extent of it, the damage was already done. Control hadn't just slipped, it had transferred. Completely. And for the first time since I walked out of that office, they weren't deciding my value anymore. They were paying for it. Looking back, your value doesn't decrease just because someone refuses to see it. For a long time, I stayed quiet, believing that hard work would eventually speak for itself. But the truth is, sometimes you have to be the one who draws the line, who walks away, and who chooses yourself before anyone else ever will. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. Now I want to ask you honestly, if you were in my position, would you have walked away and built your own path like I did? If yes, comment yes. If not, write no. And if you would handle it differently, write, maybe I truly want to hear your perspective. And if this story meant something to you, don't just scroll past it. Your subscribe, like, and share might seem small, but it can help this message reach someone who's feeling stuck, overlooked, or undervalued right now. You might not realize it, but your action today could be the reason someone else finds the courage to change their life.